Okay, so this is the first video of a series of exercises that we're going to cover in TypeScript. To begin with, we're going to be covering some basic types, and then we're going to be using the TypeScript compiler to compile those TypeScript files into usable JavaScript files. Like I said, in the first half of this course, we're going to be doing some really basic exercises, and then in the second half of this course, we're going to see how all of this can come together. So let's get started with the first exercise. We're going to cover some of the basic types in TypeScript. Okay, so first and foremost, I'm going to rename my index file to something a bit more descriptive. I'm going to call it basic types. So I'm going to go over to my index file, right click it. I'm just going to rename it to basic types and hit save. For a lot of the exercises that we're going to be writing, we're not going to be needing ESLint to be enforcing any form of code styling, so I'm just going to disable that before we go any further forward. The next step is going to be running the compiler. Like I said earlier, the compiler is responsible for taking the TypeScript files and converting them into JavaScript files. To demonstrate how we can use the compiler to compile our TypeScript files into JavaScript files, I'm just going to pull up my terminal first, and I'm going to do that in Visual Studio Code by hitting Command and J, and then I'm just going to run yarn tsc. tsc is the command that we use to run the TypeScript compiler, and if we now head over to our build folder, we can see that we have exported the basic types.js file. As you can see, the built file isn't particularly complicated at the moment. When we start using some of TypeScript's functionality, this will start getting a little bit more complicated, but you don't need to worry about that. Okay, I'm just going to close our JavaScript file and go back to our TypeScript file. Let's dip into what happens when I try and write some bad code that TypeScript doesn't like and then try and compile it. So I'm just going to reassign this fruit value into the number 1, and already I'm getting some nice errors. I'm going to hit save on that, go back to our terminal, and I'm going to type yarn tsc once again. And this time, as you can see, we're getting a TypeScript error. This says cannot assign to fruit because it is a constant, which makes perfect sense. We've declared our value as a constant and we're trying to reassign it to a new value. TypeScript has reported an error when we have exported the code. So we're going to clean that error up before moving on, and then run yarn tsc once again. And as you can see, no more error. Everything is fine. Okay, so running tsc every single time we want to compile our TypeScript files is going to get a little bit tedious. So we can use a function that TypeScript offers called watch. Simply put, if we run TypeScript watch, it will watch every single one of our TypeScript files in our project for changes. That means when we make any changes to any of our TypeScript files in our project, TypeScript will automatically compile it for us. And so to run TypeScript watch, we can just go down to our terminal once again and just run yarn tsc-w. If we look down at our terminal now, we can see that TypeScript is running in watch mode. Okay, I think we are about ready to start writing some TypeScript. For each of these exercises that we're going to be going through, I really do recommend that you follow along, and then at the end of each exercise, you can then experiment with the code yourself. Okay, for our basic types exercise, we're going to declare a string, a number, and a boolean explicitly. As you can see, we've already declared a string here, but I'm just going to remove this line and start from scratch. So as you've probably guessed, the way that we declare values in TypeScript is very, very similar to how we do it in JavaScript, but with a slight difference. If we want to explicitly declare the type of a value, we can annotate each one of our values with a type. And the way that we annotate the type of each value is simply by adding a colon at the end of the name followed by the type of the value that we want it to be. So let's see how that would look for a string. I'm going to declare a new value called city name, and then I'm going to add a colon and then a space followed by the type of the value that I want this to be. In this case, I want our city name to be of a string type, so I'm going to write string, followed by an equals, and then followed by whatever we want to assign this value to. So I'm going to assign it London. By adding this colon and the type of the value straight afterwards, we've done what is known as explicit declaration, which is basically telling TypeScript that we want our value to be a string. That means that if we try to assign it to any other value, TypeScript would deem this as invalid code, and it would then report an error at compile time. So let's see what that would look like. So I'm just going to change this from London to the number 1 and hit save. And we have our error. As you can see in the terminal, TypeScript is reporting that the number 1 is not assignable to type string. And that's great. That means that TypeScript is protecting us from using the wrong types in our code. So let's set this back to London and fix everything back up. Lovely. Okay, so that was a string. Let's follow straight up and let's do a number. So I'm going to go const city population. I'm going to explicitly declare that as a number, and I'm going to say 8 million. I think that's the population of London. Okay, I did actually just Google it, and it turns out it's closer to 9 million. So we're just going to change it to 9 million to round things up. Once again, because we've declared that our city population value is a number, if we try and assign this to 9 million, which is a string, we are once again going to get TypeScript errors. So let's revert that back to 9 million, the number once again, and hit save. And TypeScript is satisfied once again. Finally, the last type that we're going to be covering in this example is just a Boolean. So in exactly the same way that we declared our string and our number, I'm going to declare a new value. I'm going to call it is capital. And I'm going to assign it to the type Boolean. And I'm going to say that this is true because London is the capital. And that just about wraps it up for this exercise. So we've covered how we can use the TypeScript compiler to build our code into JavaScript files. We've run through some of the basic types in TypeScript, and we've also run through how we can use TypeScript's watch functionality to watch every single one of the TypeScript files in our project. We're going to be getting on to some more complex stuff in the next video, so I'm looking forward to seeing you there.